Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue, exploring people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Garret Schellenhammer.
Welcome back, Garret. What movie are we overanalyzing today?
The movie High Life.
Written and directed by French director Claire Denis, the movie is about Monty, played by Richard Pattinson, and his baby daughter as the last survivors of a damned and dangerous mission to the outer reaches of the solar system. They must now rely on each other to survive as they hurtle toward the oblivion of a black hole. I will be honest, I looked up as many descriptions of this movie as I possibly could because I didn't feel like writing my own, and not a single one of them was remotely accurate as to what this movie was about.
I recommended this movie for us to see based on the trailer.
Yes.
Which the premise was set up, not what the actual movie was about. The premise was set up, it was about prisoners who were exported to space to serve their sentence and do research for us. Right. That was the whole premise. And so we had talked a couple months ago, I was ready to talk about prison rights and all of this fun stuff about how, death row inmates and blah, blah, blah. Not what this movie is about whatsoever. So I took a friend to this. And so I was completely embarrassed by the time it was all over because this movie was oddly not about anything, but about something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do tell. What the heck was this movie about? Because I have no idea. And I can just state flat out, this has a BS 83% score on Rotten Tomatoes.
I feel, yeah.
I'm like, are you kidding me? This movie was arty, but it was terrible.
I really felt like I was dumber than the average movie critic. And usually I feel like I'm on par with the movie critic or a little bit better sometimes because I'm more critical of movies. And I was looking at all these high scores and these wonderful reviews. And I kept being like, did we see the same movie?
Oh, I'm so glad you hated it too. I'm like, oh God, I hated this movie.
The person I took with me is one of my best friends and has an IQ much higher than mine. And he was I was like, he's a real artsy kind of person. And I was like, how did you like it? He's like, I didn't understand it. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I didn't understand it either. And he was like, what? There was a disconjointed sequence of clips that were not explained, but were trying to be artsy. And it came across instead as just a disconjointed short movies put together.
Okay, I definitely feel, and we've sort of talked about genre fiction and everybody thinks, oh, I'm so brilliant and sci-fi is pathetic. I could do sci-fi. No, you can't. There's actual craft to doing sci-fi. And it really, really makes me angry when you're like, I'm just going to set this in the future and not think through anything about this plot or why they're there or what they're doing or how it all fits together.
Or explain it to your audience at all.
Yeah, it's I don't need to bother doing any of that. Yes, you do. Good science fiction is good science fiction because they have fully created a world and thought through all the implications of that structure. And if you're just going to be too lazy to do it, then please don't bother making a movie set in the future because you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I did not enjoy this movie whatsoever. I was really prepared to have a heart-to-heart about prisoners' rights and stuff like that with you, but this movie doesn't call for it because the only thing that matters about them being prisoners is why they got to space. And that's the only reason, because supposedly, whatever set in the future it is, prisoners on death row only are given the option to go into space to conduct experiments, we find out later in the movie, on black holes.
Right.
And there are so many ships. We saw up to 9 ships, but we don't know how many there were.
One with dogs on them.
Yeah.
Why were there dogs?
But it was this is where, some of the content I want to get into today is there's a motive, then there's a scientist's motive as well. So the motive was to study black holes, quote unquote. You can't see me, I do those a lot, quotes. But then each ship was giving a second mission. And the ship we watched, the one with all the only ship that we really come to contact with humans on it, is reproduction and radiation exposure to babies in space. Let me see how many babies survive radiation exposure in space and if they survive. And I'm like, I'm sorry. You're literally telling me we're just trying to see if babies survive radiation in space due to black hole exposure? what? The movie starts out with like it's a whole like
yeah. You were like, why? Why would you let somebody who was a prisoner themselves? Because so that Juliette Binoche plays this character of this evil scientist, like this mad scientist, where she's a doctor and she's inseminating and drugging everybody on board. But she is also a prisoner, and you're like, why would you let a prisoner do experiments on other prisoners? Like that makes no sense.
And me and my friend were discussing. The pilot had to be a prisoner too.
Right? So I was like, is everybody on the ship is a prisoner?
So we rewarded higher IQs and people with jobs in, I would say, technological or science fields with extra privileges just because they had those field backgrounds versus
the crimes they actually committed.
The actual crimes they committed. Because the woman who's the doctor, she suffocated her children
and stabbed her husband
and then tried to kill herself in the process. And so then she is now dedicated to reproduction. It was a weird metaphor for reproduction. Like,
plus she had something going on.
She had a plastic vagina. She had, like, when she tried to kill herself, her whole like stomach thing had to be reconstructed.
What?
Yeah, it was like a one-liner when she was another girl was tied down to a bed and she was rubbing her head. It was awkward because the doctor, let's just get out there that this doctor full on is inseminating people. So the premise is for the second experiment, men jack off into a cup and then the females are then inseminated with the sperm to see if they are compatible with it and like they have babies. And we don't know how long it's been going on because the aging process makes no sense in space because there was no timeline to explain how old people were, how slow they were aging, because it doesn't look like they're aging fast. But she's been inseminating these women continuously to try and see if they're pregnant. When they get pregnant, they wait however long the gestation period is near a black hole. We assume 9 months, but it looks like faster in the movie. And I'm not just talking like leap forward movie time. I'm like, it looks like age is sped up. We'll get to that a little later with his little girl too. And then once the baby's born, they see if it lives or dies. That's the experiment. Does the baby's molecular structure survive in the radiation of space? And I'm like, what is this movie? Like, I kept coming back to like, oh, there's got to be more. We're missing something. Like, you know, they need the babies because it's the only person left on Earth, or like something's happened to Earth. But we see one cutback to Earth with actual people who are not prisoners, which was an unnecessary part in the film where it's a scientist sitting down with an interviewer telling us this whole premise about what's happening. This doesn't happen until like halfway through the movie. And so you're confused up until then because you see some awkward sex scenes and some more awkward sex scenes and some rage and killing. But
some rape scenes.
Yeah, we like to do some trigger warnings.
Yeah, which I very much appreciated. There's
2 very vivid rape scenes, and then some subtle. I don't know how subtle rape is, but like they imply rape versus like the 2 actual right there showing rape happening. God, I don't know. This movie was terrible, people. Please don't see this movie. It was artsy. It got a lot of critical acclaim. The director, you know, she's done a lot of good work, apparently. I've not seen a single one of her films. But Robert Pattinson begged for this role. That's how much
That's what I couldn't figure out. I was sitting there, I'm like, let's say I'm Juliette Binoche. So imagine that I'm, you know, approximately 150 times more attractive than I am right now, right? So, okay, I'm Juliette Binoche. I read the script and I'm like, why would I take this part? Like, why would you even want to be in this movie? I just can't fathom. And so I will say a couple things. One, it is typically French, as it is slow and it is boring.
That would have been fine with me, though.
I don't like French movies.
The pacing, I think, would have been fine. Go ahead. Let's continue, yeah.
2, I will say, I can see the one aspect of this movie that drew critical appeal, which is that it is beautifully shot.
That was, I mean...
If someone was going to give this an Oscar for cinematography, I would not even hesitate to say well-deserved. Like, actually, for what this movie was, it was just beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful movie. Doesn't make up for the fact that it made no sense, it had no plot, and like, yeah.
And we talk a lot about cutscenes and flashbacks here on the show. You and I have talked about that a lot. It's not that quite. It's a disconjointed movie, which is hard to follow, which to me is very like French, like Amelie or something like that. It's a very, yeah, I think you're right. It's a very French genre movie where the scenes are shorts within themselves that make up an entire movie. But usually there's some explanation that comes with those shorts. And the way it was shot, I don't disagree, is like, I mean, somebody took a lot of time to reshoot these scenes again and again and again. You can tell just by the way that their director should get a little bit of credit for that, but their cameramen, I'm sure, are tired and worn out at the end of every day because of how well it was shot. But it doesn't make up for the fact of, like, you shot something super well. You could have at least put it in an order that was conceivable to understand. Because one moment his baby girl is, you know, like 1-2 years old. The next minute she's years from being born. The next minute she's a teenager of like 14, 15. And you're like, what? Wait, what? And then we go back to her being a baby. And then we go back to her being a teenager. Then we go back to her not being born. And so, like, there was no continuity. You couldn't follow the storyline very clearly because you were like, who is that? And his daughter looked too much like some of the other characters that you couldn't tell the difference. But basically what happens along the way is you put a bunch of people on a ship together and they go, it doesn't matter if they're criminals or not. They went space crazy. Like, lost in space for how many, gosh, we did the math, 781 years is how long when he did the log on Earth years. And it was like, you know, so many days, and it was like 781 years is how much it was.
Okay. So
they were in space for 781 years.
You got so much more out of this movie than I did. But I was just like so bored and checked out. I literally took no notes. I've never not taken like a notes for a movie. I was like, I have nothing to say except I hate this movie.
That's just how to explain how, like, they didn't explain how time works near a black hole or anything like that, because they're there in outer space for, I'm pretty sure 781 is the math I did. And on Earth, it was only like 100 or 29 years or something like that. So they'd only been gone for a short period of time on Earth. In space, it was like 29 years, but on Earth, it was like 781 years. So time was a relative concept that we just constructed and kind of came up with a theory that was already existing that we just destroyed and said, oh, fuck it. Relative theory of time doesn't apply here at our black hole. Guys, don't we see this movie?
Why was everybody so there's a part of the movie where like everybody's been cryogenically frozen after they apparently died, and then he just releases them all into space. And I'm like, why were they frozen in the first place? It's quite clear the ship's never coming back. It's not on a return trajectory. Like, what was the point of that? Like, why would you waste resources in a very limited resource area?
And I think that's the one thing that the movie missed out on. They could have played a little more into the fact of, like, these prisoners were told they were going to get to come back to Earth. Once they collected their data on black holes, they were told they were going to get to come back. But the one scene cut back to Earth is like, we never told them they're not coming back. So it was a non-informed consent, right? Like, so yeah, so then you're like, so these people agreed to, so we live in a world where you can shoot people into space if they're prisoners and not tell them they're never coming back, which, right.
And you can let other prisoners do experiments, like,
it didn't make
and you were like, why are we in this Earth? Like, what is the point of this?
And it seemed like it was set in our timeline. It didn't seem like it was like super into the future or anything like that, everybody. And so it was...
Nobody ages.
Nobody
gets gray hair or needs a touch-up of their roots, which always drives me crazy when you do sci-fi, because everybody's, like, shaved and, you know, it's like the zombie apocalypse, but I had time to redo my blonde highlights. Like...
So, with all of that, I could have, like, been like, it was I could have, at that, all we've discussed before, I can be like, B movie. What takes me to a C/D movie is the overt sexual awkwardness of the movie. The doctor can't get anybody pregnant. They're all dying because they're near a black hole and babies can't survive radiation in space. Shocker. No one's shocked by that. That's her whole experiment that she's been finding out for 29 years or however long they're in space. But, so then people start to go space crazy. And when people go space crazy, you lose your mind, you lose time, sense, reality. So one guy becomes obsessed with staying in the garden and ends up basically dying. I don't know. It's not implied whether he killed himself or just laid in the garden until he died. Like, he becomes obsessed with the onboard garden to just lay in the earth for the last time and want to be in the earth physically. But here's where we take a weird turn. At the first rape scene, we don't know how many people have died before this, besides the captain of the ship who got leukemia due to radiation. Why the rest of them were immune to leukemia and radiation? Unclear.
Well, he's like the Superman, and she needed his super genes to create this baby, which you're like, what is the point?
Oh, I mean the actual captain, the one who
No, I know,
pilot,
but yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, he dies, but I'm saying, like, then the implication in the movie is that Robert Pattinson is, like, the chosen one, right? You get that, like, narrative of, like, you're special, you're different than everybody. Why?
Only because he refuses to give a sperm sample. Like, he's only the chosen one because he refuses to give his sperm sample to science. He's he's like that, I'm resisting the science, but I'm still stuck on this spaceship, but I'm not going to give my sperm to be tested on women.
But also I won't masturbate either. Like, there's a weird, like, in terms of all the sexual overtones, like, his choosing full, like, chastity and purity is celebrated.
Yeah.
In this really why?
Yeah. So we see people when they start to go space crazy, one guy attempts to rape a woman, and it was awkward to watch because the women were tied down at that moment because they were inseminated and they were seeing if it was taking. So during insemination, they would tie them down so they couldn't, like...
No, I think everybody was tied down, which was then, like, why wasn't he tied down? Women. They're prisoners.
Only the women. The women were only tied down during insemination.
Right, and that made no sense. It was like, why is he not tied down? They're prisoners. Like, this was totally going to happen. Like,
so we see a male prisoner try, well, I would say rape. There's no try. He did rape one person and then attempt to rape a second person. So then they kill him. Okay? You know, we can talk about justice later, but they kill him. Period. End of sentence. Move on. But then we get this weird thing where the doctor's still not getting any results out of babies. And so we're like, okay, she's like, what do I do? Oh, I'm going to rape the chastity monk, basically, and abstinence monk, as I guess we'll call him, Robert Pattinson. So she hops on him while he's asleep, rapes him.
Asleep, she's doped him to sleep. So she's basically roofied him and then rapes him.
And then he ejaculates inside of her. And then you see her graphically squat.
Yeah, and collect it.
Collect the cum. She takes it and then, I would say, rapes again another woman by inseminating her while she's drugged up and asleep.
Yeah.
That's where we get the baby. The baby seems to be important to the movie. In the end, you find out it's really not.
Yeah, and then there's a scene, so there's that, there's this, like, really graphic, which everybody talked about, graphic isn't the right word, just, like, uncomfortable scene where Juliette Binoche is basically having, like, I guess masturbating, if that's the right word, with the machine from...
Burn After Reading.
Burn After Reading. And I was like, oh, is that the thing from Burn After Reading? Because that's pretty much what it was like. If you've seen Burn After Reading, it's like a mechanically operated dildo. So there's this like very artsy, a prolonged scene of her like having sex with this like F machine.
Which it's just fascinating. The whole idea of this mission is for reproduction. And what we know about reproduction studies is reproduction happens like best when like people who are trying to get pregnant normally do normal things. Have sex the normal way. And so, but the ship is equipped with it's called literally a fuck box on the ship, which is it shows pornographic material. It has a writable component for whoever wants to use it, men or women. It has stirrups. It has a bench. It has it's a room built for sexual pleasure, but they're supposed to be using it to dispel sexual energy and tension. But the whole point of the experiment is to be collecting men's semen and women to be fertile, and so but the scene awkward. I don't know how to describe it either. It's painfully weird to watch, and I'm a big sex positive person. It had no point in the movie though. It was an added, not even raw sexual energy. It was a space sexual energy that was just like...
Well, you've made her so creepy and unlikable in the movie already, so then to see her like have the sexual experience, like it's just so uncomfortable. Like, you just like her. It's like you already have a weird vibe about her, and then it just makes it more uncomfortable. Yeah, it's not.
And I want to make sure that both of us are pointing out, neither of us are not, we're both pretty sex positive. I mean, we've had conversations many times, but like, this didn't feel like sex was important to the plot in any way, shape, or form. To this fuckbox did not play into or feed into any of the plot that mattered. All it was there was for an artsy, graphic, let me have a sexual scene in this movie that was not rape.
It was not rape, but like and this is something I just really dislike, and without going into a lot of like bizarre feminist theory, like there is a lot of this movie that is equating like sex and violence and sex and pain. And I as a sex positive person, I'm like, I'm not into the S&M community. That's fine. Whoever wants to be, again, I don't care. But it's like, I don't equate those things, and I don't want to see violence and sex, interpolated in that way. It makes me uncomfortable and unhappy,
well, and I think
like
even
empathetically like upset,
Yeah, and I think people who are part of the BDSM community would say that this movie was not any way, shape, or form.
No! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that.
I just it went beyond the point of there was no consensual in this movie besides what you did to yourself, and two, it was like, I don't want to take away, because I also was like, God, maybe I'm just being a prude, well, which is ironic, but yeah, I was like, what if I don't want to take away from women having sexual interest, because like women have just as many sexual interests as men, but it didn't feel like a feminist, it didn't feel like BDSM, it really felt like the only way to engage in sex in this spaceship colony. I don't know if you can call it a colony, it was 28 rooms, 7x4 counted while the movie was going on. This is how bored I was. 28 rooms in a space station with nowhere to do, and one of these rooms includes a fuck box, which everybody uses to dispel sexual tension, but it just doesn't make sense. If that was on a different ship with a different objective other than getting people pregnant, I would understand. But I felt like an unnecessary add-in to only make us like feel an awkward, displaced, uncomfortable, like it was grotesque is almost the word I would use, because it wasn't sexual in nature. It was pretty violent to herself, and I don't care how you pleasure yourself, but I think you're right. There was a pain to it, because the whole reason she is having sex is because she's frustrated because she can't get other people pregnant and can't keep their babies. So she's using sex as a coping mechanism to like, and this literally sounds grotesque, she's fucking out her pain through this fuck box, and it didn't come across as something that like meshes, is copacetic. Like it was nothing that like humanly tangible, and that's the only way I could say it, because I don't know that anybody's gonna watch that scene, because in the theater of like 25 people, which I was shocked at, everybody groaned at that scene, and there was men, there was women, there was all ages represented, and very diverse. It was at E Street Theater, so there was a lot of diverse people there, and everyone kind of groaned at that scene. And if you get that reaction from an audience consistently,
and the critics loved it,
you're doing something wrong.
Like every review I read like praised that scene, and I don't want to like, I don't want to beat this point to death, but I think you're right. It's like really interesting because with all of the sort of problems and censorship around like women's pleasure, like why was this scene so disturbing? And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, there's a pain, or there's just something about the way it was filmed and the way she's portrayed in this sort of very, also like,
I think what you're experiencing right now, though, is exactly how everybody feels. I mean, I don't know if you can hear in Nicole's voice how like she's speechless, but also like you got quieter. Like it was unexplainable. And YouTube it, because I'm sure it'll be on YouTube eventually.
Yeah,
this scene, if you really want to see it. But it's a hard scene to watch, not because she's pleasuring herself. Like, I could get over that. I love a good sex scene in a movie, probably more than most people, because I think I am more sex positive than the average person. But this was so full of, and I love the word like raw energy, raw sexual energy, passion, but it had none of that. But it also didn't have the pain I think we are alluding to. That was our interpretation. It was just an unnecessary everyday moment of this woman's life where she is trying to like make her more human for killing these babies, that she also has needs and she also wants to be seen as a human. But the moment she walks out of it, somebody else walks into it, and it's even more awkward because, like, she's just come off of this really high sexual experience, walking out sweaty, gross, gross in a good way, not a bad way. And she walks out and there's like another person waiting in line to use this. It's almost as like that's their only place for humanity, is that box to say, I'm still human. I can still find pleasure in something. And I'm not sure if I agree with that, because the movie itself shows us more aspects of humanity, how they treat each other, because I think what they all expected is for them to kill each other or for them to hurt each other. You know what I mean? And the only reason they all end up dead is because the doctor did an evil experiment on them, and the woman who got pregnant couldn't cope with her baby about to die. So while her baby's in the incubator waiting, she thinks it's going to die, as every other baby has before hers, she starts killing people. Just is like she had a psychotic break is what I would call it. And she goes and decides to go into a black hole and die.
But can I point out on a very shallow note that actress did not have a big butt? And it was extremely annoying that everyone kept calling her, like, big booty. And I'm like, she has, like, no butt. Like, why do we keep doing this? But yeah, and then I think then the problem became for me with this movie was, like, then we've created all of this awkward sexual tension, for lack of a better word. So that when his daughter's a teenager and, like, in bed with him, I think, like, some incest stuff is going to go down. And I kept waiting for it the whole time, because it's like, it was just... I just felt that's exactly where that movie was going to go, and apparently not, but like... I thought the same thing. One, it took me a minute to realize it's his daughter, because again, we jump from his daughter being a baby to his daughter being like 14, 15. And when we do that, we wake up and seeing his daughter's in bed with him. And I was like, where did this girl come from? Yeah. Who is he sleeping with now? And it's not just that she's in bed with them. It's like that they're the only two who've been living together for however many years old she is. So she's now 15 and they've only been together for 15 years. And so she's the only human contact he knows, which we can talk about language development for another day. But it's so... her accent kept slipping. It was the worst. So fascinating that she had such high language development compared to him as even the script. So, like, I don't think they thought about, like, how language development would work. Yeah, anyway. Again, she kept breaking into an English accent. But she, like, wakes up in his bed and then goes back to her bed and she's on her period. Yeah, and then she, like, reaches her hand down. And again, look, there's unfortunately, like, especially as a Jewish person, there's thousands of years of history that teaches women that they're dirty when they are on their period, which I do not agree with. But also, like, she reaches down, touches her menstrual blood, and then just, like, goes back to sleep. Wipes it on the bed and goes to sleep. And I'm like, wash your hands. Like, ew. But it did make me think that they do have a sexual relationship, because it was like, while her period was going on, she was in bed with her father, which would be one of the only times they could probably have a sexual relationship and not have the possibility of bearing a child. And so it was like this odd sexual tension. So we get and like, let me tell you things that I like less than like rape almost is like incest plot lines. Like, ew, I don't need to see that. Gross. So we end the movie with like them finding one of the other ships, which was full of dogs, so we assume that their second subjective was like running dog experiments on dogs or whatnot. We don't know if there was humans on that ship. Who knows, because we didn't see anything. But then like the girl's like, I want a dog, and he's like, it might have disease, it might kill me. And she's like, okay. And then so they decide finally, like, just end their lives and let's go into a black hole together and see what's on the other side. Now this is the most ironic part of the movie. This movie was probably made, I don't know, months ago before it was ready for production, and it just was released. How coincidental is it that the same week we get a black hole picture? The movie portrays the black hole almost identically as the picture we were shown. That was the most coincidental part to me. It was like, ironic. That's what a black hole looks like to them, and that's what she envisioned the black hole looking like. And then here we have this actual evidence 2 weeks ago that was like, oh, actual black hole.
discovered by an algorithm written by a woman scientist. Props to her, by the way. I want to give credit to women in science if we're talking about science fiction movies, who discovered a black hole. But then they ride off into the black hole, and I don't know your interpretation of the movie. I thought they died.
Yeah, of course they died. What were they?
Because they
but then it wasn't clear why they were suddenly suicidal. They could have left the ship and died at any moment. What was the whole point of that?
It didn't make sense as why, other than the daughter thought they might live, but no one had ever survived a black hole before. So don't see this movie. Don't watch the sex scene on YouTube. Don't. Robert Pattinson.
If it's out there, I'll provide a link to it in the notes, though. Yeah.
But that's and his acting, we haven't talked about his acting because there was no acting, everybody. He literally didn't say anything. He just gave looks the entire movie, had very little plot.
Yeah, somebody, so I was talking about it today with someone, and she's like, what did you think of the movie? She was like, how was the acting? And I was like, I didn't know how to respond. I was like, I don't feel like there was any acting.
I feel like they all were reading scripts from books. Not even a script here's a play script. It was they were reading a script that was then published in a book and implying their own, there was no direction to what they were reading, you know?
And I will say this, I missed a bunch of things. I just didn't hear them well. They were pieces, which in a movie that had very little dialogue, missing anything was going to be problematic because it was already hard to follow. And I was like, what did he say? He's like, oh, we call you something when he said she was like, I know you guys all think I'm a witch. And I was like, the what?
Yeah,
I totally missed that.
He calls the doctor the semen shaman.
No, before that.
He calls her the name of an actual deity. Is
that what that was? I was like,
my friend knew what it was.
Oh, good. I was I feel like that went over my head. But
it's a fertility goddess.
Ah, okay. So I just...
There was that.
There was no acting.
That was the point of the whole movie, though. There are these weird random things that don't tie in if you didn't know any of that don't go over your head, but just are pointless information because they don't feed the plot.
Well, it had no... I don't know what this... Again, I don't know what this movie was about.
I could have watched this movie. I literally think if you would have published this in 7 shorts, periods just of what was going on, it would have been such a more interesting, small series done somewhere, because it would have, at least you could have published them in order so you would have understood weirdly how it worked. But as a movie, it just didn't work for me. Nothing worked about this. I didn't like it. There was no acting. There was no plot. Cinematography, I loved it, but it didn't do anything to help the movie because there was such lack of everything else.
Well, yeah, and it's I am not... I feel like if you are making a feature-length film, you are trying to sell an idea, you know what I mean? You're trying to tell me a story or tell me an idea, and this was here's a bunch of random ideas that I threw together, and I just used really good cinematography. But again, the cinematography was in service of what, actually? It didn't connect to the theme because there didn't seem to be a theme. And I'm just so frustrated. I'm so frustrated that because this movie looked arty, it got this free pass from critics. And
I wonder how many of the critics, this is what I've been thinking for a while now, how many of the critics actually sit down and watch the whole movie versus just watch part of it, scroll through, you know what I mean?
I don't know. I felt like when I actually picked apart their reviews and I read them, they were all I don't know what this movie was about. And it was pretty incoherent. And I was like, so why did you say it was good? Why even why equate that as a positive review?
I don't know how you sat through this movie, and I really, because this is the first time we've actually completely disagreed. Usually we're they got 50% and one of us likes it, one of us doesn't, which splits the room or something like that. But no, there was this is the one we've both been it was awful. And all the critics loved. And my friend was even I don't know how everybody liked it. Did they watch a different movie? Was there more? Was there an extended part? Was there explanation? Did they get to talk with the director? Did they ask questions? Because he's if people got questions answered, maybe I could see why they'd like it, because then plot was explained. But just the movie standalone by itself, I was sad I spent money on it.
Yeah, I was sad I spent money on it. And I also was I would like the refund of that 2 hours, please. I literally was I want the time back. I'm angry that I wasted this time.
And that goes back to our original point. I'm so mad that the trailers, the synopsis, anything that has talked about this movie made it look so much different than the reality. And that's what's frustrating is that's what I base my movie experiences on. When I read synopsis, I watch a trailer, then I go read a synopsis, what it's supposed to be about. You go look up synopsis online, you're going to think this movie is going to be very, probably not horror science fiction, but more like intense thriller, and they're prisoners in space, and they're conducting experiments on them, and then they like go crazy, and like what's happening. And so I was expecting something like that we could really talk about.
Yeah, me too.
Nah.
And honestly, if you've learned one thing by listening to us talk this time, I hope you've realized that the description I read at the beginning of the podcast was completely inaccurate. Like, it was just like, yeah. So
it didn't work, and that was the saddest part because I had such high expectations for this movie.
I mean, yeah, I just, as beautifully shot as it was, I was like, wow, it is frustrating to see a movie that's with this level of craft in only one area. And you're like, this person should have taken their time to shoot somebody else's film because this is bad. And yeah. So on that note, on a social impact score of 1 to 10, once again, I would like to give this a negative score, so I will bottom out at a 1. Don't see this movie.
God, social impact, I don't know.
I think it actively does harm.
Like it does. There was a lack of impact, so giving it a 1 says there was some sort of impact. So.
Well, the scale is 1 to 10.
I know.
You can't go lower than a 1.
But I agree with you. Like I think.
Yeah, I know. You want to give it a negative
because this had such potential to bring to light so many good things and. Social impact 1, sorry, I don't know if I said that, but like there's nothing there because it's such like it could have done empowerment for women, it could have done like them taking back their rights and saying you can't control us, we are.
Yeah, I mean I did like we signed up for this because I thought like, oh, prison rights is just something that doesn't get talked about enough, and like prison labor is really rampant in this country, like there's just and there's a long very upsetting history of prison experimentation as well.
Right,
like,
and I was like all prepared. I was like, oh my God,
too.
Prisoners fighting back, showing, hey, we're not your property, we're not cattle, we're not animals. None of that was here.
Yeah. All right, tell us something we should see, read, watch, do. What are your recommendations for the week?
Well, the only thing I really have to recommend is if you actually want to read a story about death row individuals that's based on a true story and fascinating. Dead Man Walking, the eyewitness account of the death penalty that sparked a national debate by Sister Helen Perjane. And this is, I don't know if you've ever...
I've seen the movie.
There's a movie. Movie's actually quite fits nicely with the book. It's written by a nun who was visiting a man on death row, and it sparked a national debate about how we use death row and how people's innocent or guilt determines the death penalty. I think it's a really great recommendation. And I'm also going to recommend a movie about space time travel that I thought was much better, Annihilation, that came out recently. You guys...
Yeah, we did that.
A review. So either go listen to the podcast if you don't want to watch the movie, or actually watch Annihilation if you want to actually get a good science fiction movie about space and time travel.
I'm going to break the code of silence on something.
Okay.
I'm busting doors wide open, people. Look. If you have never had a pregnant woman do you a solid on this, I'm going to go ahead and recommend maternity pajamas. That is my recommendation for the week. Men, if you have inseam issues, this may not be a great recommendation for you, but regular pajamas are super comfortable. Maternity pajamas, I'm not pregnant, nor am I seriously overweight, and I am here to tell you, maternity pajamas are where it's at. You will never want to wear anything else again.
Solid.
And I'm really angry that no friend of mine who's ever been pregnant wasn't like, you know what you should get, Nicole? Maternity pajamas. So I'm here to tell everybody that. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter and, have taken to heart our advice not to see this movie. If you did, take a second to leave a review on iTunes and recommend us to your friends. Check out moviesthatmatterpodcast.com for links to things we've discussed and to visit our store. If you want to talk to us, leave a comment on our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod. And check Twitter next week to find out what movie we're overanalyzing next. And remember, movies matter.
So do you.
We'll see you next time.